Yeah, and that applies to a lot of things when you want to do just a sketch on the street and you draw that. There's a lot of things you don't like the wires and the angles you don't have. You can just remove that and do it. So you have a little bit of that when you do a cartoon because you just draw the stuff that you want to attract attention to. I do that a little bit too when I do my stuff on Jerusalem and I want to explain just one precise detail. I draw a map where I point like this is here and this is here, and I don't confuse the whole thing with a lot of details, just two things. It's very efficient.
Is this on? Yes. Okay, so we look a little bit like talk show hosts with the handheld mics and the chairs. I hope you'll forgive that effect. Guy, it's so nice to finally meet you. I've been following your work for a long time, and it's so great to have you here in Cambridge. For those of you who don't know, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think that you came to prominence, at least in the US, when your book Pyongyang was translated into English in 2005. And I'm hoping that you could tell us a little bit about how you started doing long-form comics, because you have this fascinating background as an animator. So could you describe how you turned to doing comics with that book?
Yeah, I've been doing animation as a work, and then they sent me over in China, and then at the time they were going in North Korea a lot. It sounds very strange today, but at the time I know a lot of people in my field who were going in North Korea, coming back and saying it was very boring. And then I realized, but of course, well, it's North Korea, what do you expect? And so they asked me to go, and so I did the book. But before, so I was in China. I was doing short story in magazines. I've never done book before. And Shenzhen started as a short story, it's a 16-page. I was looking for something, and I wanted to do autobiography material. So I thought, oh, coming back from China, where I was working, I thought maybe some of these stories would be funny to put in paper, in short stories. So I did 16-page, and I liked it. Another 16-page after, we thought, oh, maybe we can do more and make a book out of that. And that's how it started. And then I thought, well, it's interesting to put yourself in a book and to describe a situation like that. And then I was sent to Pyongyang. But before I was sent to Vietnam, I took notes, and I came back from Vietnam doing the same work. But there was not much that happened to me that I considered interesting to make a book of. So I thought,
in Vietnam?
Yeah, so I thought it's not because I go somewhere that I'm going to have enough material to do a book with that. So then I was sent to North Korea, and I was in that frame of mind. And then the first thing that happened in North Korea, they gave me flowers, but I knew what it was for because I was briefed before. And they said, we're not going to go to the hotel yet. We're just going to go to a little hill where there's a very nice view. And then I knew where we were going. So we go in front of that huge statue, and I have to put the flower in front of the statue and pay my respect to Kim Jong-il, like that. And as I was doing that, I was saying to myself, wow, the stuff you have to do to make a living. and I was saying as well, this is only half an hour. I think there's going to be enough material for a book here.
So what was appealing to you about doing comics autobiography? You mentioned you had decided to start doing autobiographical pieces.
Yeah, actually, a lot of people were doing that in the magazine where I was. And I thought, well, it's interesting. But then at the same time, I was thinking, I don't think I can do that. But then coming back from China, I was reading my notes because I was taking notes while I was there. I thought, maybe I can talk about China. And the only way I was seeing a good narrative way to do it is to be there and to go around with the reader and say, I've seen this and this is funny, and then I've met this guy and this was funny. So I just tried it once, but I didn't think it would be a book, and I didn't think it would be a series of books after that, because I thought after China, well, I'm going to go work on something else. And then, well, the occasion to go in North Korea and to be able to walk around on the streets and just, it's like one of the fantasies of a lot of journalists around the world. And I was there on the street thinking, wow, this is a weird place. Yeah, I thought, well, I have to make a book about that because it's very unique as a regard.
And And were you thinking that there was some connection between being in North Korea and also doing comics? So you would be able to draw things that you maybe wouldn't have been able to have photographed in front of your handlers or your minders?
Yeah, I was there in 2001, so at the time there was not so much camera, numeric camera. So it was, but I didn't bring a camera with me because I knew that they would be more relaxed with me if I don't shoot around stuff. But actually, my friend who was there, he had like a movie, it was half professional movies, and he was shooting a lot of stuff, and they never said anything actually. But so I didn't have any pictures, and being there, yeah, of course, knowing that after that, out of memory, you can just redraw everything that you've seen, because every day I was taking little notes and reading them back. A few months after, when I was home, I could see exactly how it looked like, and I could just redraw it. That would have been impossible to do otherwise, because when you go in the Kim Il-sung temple, there's no way you can take pictures there, or same in the museum. But when you do cartoon, you can do all the thing afterwards. So that's a big plus, of course.
Right. I'm so interested in that idea that you can tell this story through drawing in a way that you couldn't in any other form, in a sense.
Yeah, and that applies to a lot of things when you want to do just a sketch on the street and you draw that. There's a lot of things you don't like the wires and the angles you don't have. You can just remove that and do it. So you have a little bit of that when you do a cartoon, because you just draw the stuff that you want to attract attention to. I do that a little bit too when I do my stuff on Jerusalem and I want to explain just one precise detail. I draw a map where I point like this is here and this is here, and I don't confuse the whole thing with a lot of details, just two things. It's very efficient. For me, comic book is very a very efficient way to tell a story, to explain and to make humor as well. Because in one page you have like 5 or 6 sentences you're going to use, so they have to be very precise and very small and concise. And that's what I like, because I'm always afraid to bore people. So when I have stuff to say, I like it when it's short and it's concentrate. And you can always choose from either a drawing or a text. Like sometimes a text is too long, so you can make just a drawing. And for example, there's the book on Jerusalem where on the airport, so I have to explain the situation, and that's very boring because I have to say, well, I'm back again, and now my kids are 10, 6, and 4, and we're going to be there for a while. So I wrote all that, and I said, yeah, this is very boring for a start. And then I found a solution. I just put one drawing of me with the suitcase pushing on the airport, so you know what's happening. It's in the airport. And I just put an arrow and say, Louis, 6 years, and Alice, 4 years. And that's it. So it's very concentrate, and I just love that.
Did your background or your training or your work in animation help you at all to make comics?
In some ways that are a bit, I was thinking about that last week, actually, because drawing, because you do a lot of drawing. You have to analyze a movement. Like there's the movement, but there's the anticipation to prepare the movement, and after that there's the reaction. So you get really good at looking at details and do lots of observation. And I think I've used the same thing for narration, because you want to talk about something like a subject, but you have to prepare before so that the reader is ready to for that subject. Like if you explain right away that Aung San Suu Kyi lives there and she's seen as like a god almost for the people, well, it's interesting, but it can be much more interesting if I go in front of the house with my baby and I try to go in front.
This is in the Burma Chronicles book.
And then I think because I'm a father, they're going to let me go, but they don't. They just say, you're a foreigner. No, they ask me, are you a foreigner? But yeah, of course I am. So I for a second, I think, yeah, I'm going to say, yeah, no, I'm not, but that's not going to work. So they don't let me go, and I come back, and then I do the explanation on Aung San Suu Kyi, and it's a time where on the narration, the reader is ready to get that information. So that actually, it comes from kind of a grid system that I've used in animation.
So you've been mentioning some of your other books, Burma Chronicles, Jerusalem, Shenzhen, and it's in your book Shenzhen that you actually note in the pages of that book, and this is an image that will come up at some point, that you're reading about Christophe André.
Yeah.
So back in 1997, you read about him and you got interested in him. Can you explain how you decided to stick with this story and how you decided to make a work about his experience?
I've been fascinated by kidnapping stories. I've saw a few documents of people that were saying that sometime coming back home was actually the hardest part because a lot of things happen. And in France, there's that guy called Brice Flotiot. When he came, his wife, she was gone with the Paris Match journalist. And he committed suicide. It was very dramatic. So I read Christophe André's story on the newspaper, and I thought, wow, what a great way to complete a story like that. Because he escaped. He just came back home, and for him, like he said in that article, he felt like a football player who scored the last goal and won the match. So he felt actually quite good about the whole story, which was very impressive. And so that was in 1997 that it happened to him. And I read that, and then I went to work in China, and I was thinking about him because I was in a situation where I was kind of lost in translation. And I was thinking of he was kidnapped for such a long time that me being there and not being able to communicate with people, it's so small compared to what he has done. So yeah, this book was published, and then I was visiting a friend who worked at that same NGO, Doctors Without Border, and she said, you know, there's Christophe André who's here, and he can come and eat with us. So I was at the table next to him, and then I was thinking, it's probably a traumatic experience, and he's not going to want to talk about that, even though I have like tons of questions to ask him. And it was the opposite. He was super open, and I was with my friend, and he gave us the whole story with all the details, how he escaped and everything that happened while he was there, all the small details, and we were both like listening to him going like, wow, this is incredible. And I told him right away, so that's in 2001 that I met him, we should do a comic book someday with that. And he said, yeah, sure, why not?
So he was open to it from the beginning.
Yeah. He told me if that would have been a traumatic experience, first he wouldn't have talked about it, and he would have never done a book about it.
That's so interesting. So it didn't feel as traumatic to him as it could have because he escaped. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what he says. He says the best therapy for a kidnapping is to escape.
That's a good point.
But then you have to escape. That's the problem.
Maybe that's the hard part.
Yeah, they're all different because I've tried working on his story to read a few other kidnap stories, and they're all very different. Sometimes they have stuff to read. Sometimes they're with someone. Sometimes they are violently abused. I would have never been able to talk about that. And sometimes they try to escape, then they get caught again. Or they're with other people, so it's very different. So every kidnapping story is very unique.
Right. So one of the things that's so striking about Hostage, especially for a person who knows your previous travelogues, is that you're not a character in this book. It's really about his experience. There's one page that has a drawing of you talking to him, but that's the only time we get you as a character. So you spent 15 years working on this book. Congratulations. It was
a long process, yeah.
Please, I'm so curious to know what that process was like. What were you doing over those 15 years?
Yeah, I was doing other books mainly, but I was working in animation, so I had to stop, and then and sometimes it would take me 2-3 times to make a book like Shenzhen. I've been going away working in animation 2 times during the process of that book. So for Christophe, it was a bit the same. I did start the book right after I saw him because I did a recording in 2003, and I did 10 or 12 pages I showed I showed to my publisher. He was very excited. He really liked the idea. He was going for it all. And then I came back after from work, and I looked again at these pages, and I didn't like them anymore. And then I was sent away to Pyongyang, and that was before. And then I was sent with my wife. We went to Burma, and then I said, well, I'll do it after. And then we were in Jerusalem. I said, I'll do it. So I was keep pushing it for different reasons, because coming back from a long travel like that, it was nice to just do the book after, because you have it in your head. And I was a bit afraid, actually, to work on the Christophe André book, because I'm not there. I have to make someone else talk. So that was something that I had to work on. And I was always thinking, well, I'll do it later. And I talked so much about that story to the people around me at one point that I had the impression, I'm never going to do that mistake again. I had the impression that I've already done the book. But then you sit at your table and you know that you have probably more than 300 pages to draw. It's like, oh, okay, let's do it now.
Right, so
And
the book is 432 pages. It goes by quickly, but it's long.
yeah,
So I can imagine that you felt that way.
I didn't know it would be that long, though, working on it, because I don't do a long. I did a long plan actually. That's my second version. I said, well, I'm going to write the whole thing, and maybe that's going to help me to work on it. Um, but then it doesn't work for me either. I have to work with small detail and go at my table, not knowing exactly what I'm doing. I read all the thing that happened in chronological order, and then I said, yeah, okay, this happened, so I do it during that day or 2 day or 3 day, and then I come back. So it has to work almost. I was drawing almost at the same speed that he was there, which is 1 day at a time almost. So I was almost working at the same pace. And I bought handcuffs that were there on my table. So I had these handcuffs and I was like working, same thing.
Immersion
Yeah.
cartooning.
And I grew a beard and at one point I thought, wow, that's too much.
So I'm interested that you mentioned that you had done, I don't, 12 pages or so, 12, a small number of pages, and that you didn't like it. What was
No.
something that you didn't like about your first try?
Well, I treat them with. It was too much based on action and kind of special effects somehow because the kidnapping was like close-ups, angles, shadows, and then yeah, it was like wow, you could hear the music going like ta-da. And after some readings that I've done with comic books, I've realized that if it's a real life story and you put a lot of special effects, you kind of yeah, it doesn't work together. It's better to keep it very simple, and then you realize that it's actually a real life story. So I've read books like that by very talented artists that are actually too talented because they do books that looks like Hollywood movie, and then you realize, oh yeah, it's actually a true story. But so it's not as good as a Hollywood movie because it's a true story, but you kind of forget it while you read it because it goes really quickly. So.
Or it's better than a Hollywood movie because it's a true story.
Yeah, but then I remember one influence was Chester Brown doing a Louis Riel story. He talks about a real life, well, the biography of Louis Riel, which happened, and in Canada there were some very dramatic parts. There's some battle scene that you see from like a helicopter view almost. So it's, I mean, for the action it's zero, but the story is so strong because this is deciding if Canada is going to be English or French. So you can imagine for a French Canadian what it feels like to see in that scene, and then you go like, what's going to happen? And while that teach me that you can be very tense on a situation, it needed that. The more you put special effects, the less you are. You work with a real life story. So that's why I didn't keep this page. They were too.
So one of the things that I find so amazing about this book, especially because I mentioned it is 432 pages, is that the premise, at least on its face, seems like it could be very boring, right? Mm-hmm. The story of a hostage is obviously very interesting, but to try to tell and to show a person's 111 days in captivity seems pretty tough because there isn't a lot of action for a large number of pages. So what were some of the difficulties of trying to tell that kind of story? It's not boring at all, and I think it's because you're such an amazing visual storyteller, but it's not intuitive that would necessarily work.
Well, I've never had doubts on that, probably because I worked on books like Shenzhen, where I do talk about being bored and not being to communicate with people. But then in your head, there's lots of things that happens. I like to work with small details. That's what I do in all my books. And this time it was Christophe André's detail. But I remember listening to him and telling me the story of him being in a house where he was kept hostage, but there was still the life. It's like if you have someone behind there being hostage, you can hear everything that's going on, and it's so surreal as a situation. And the day that they forgot to attach him, but the door was closed. He couldn't go out of the room, and he just has like the whole evening to touch the wall that he has seen for so long. And
Right.
he was telling me that it was like a breath of freedom in a situation where you have no freedom at all.
Just to be able to touch the wall.
Yeah.
Right.
So this was such a good story inside of that. And right from the beginning, I told myself I'm going to put all these details because they were part of a global thing. I wanted to show all the details. And I knew that reading comic book is very different from a movie, because a movie, I think if you would make a movie out of that, it would be probably boring. And a movie, if it's 2 hours, everybody's going to see it for 2 hours. A comic book, you can go much faster if you want to see what's going on afterwards. You can slow down, you can put it there, you can come back. So the rhythm is very different. And I knew that the reader would go, it would work for the reader, even if it's small details, because there's always a little suspense. The balance was to find suspense enough so that the reader wants to turn the page, but I wanted to show that it's a long process, and I wanted to show the time, because for him, Christophe, he was saying, I'm probably going to be there for a weekend, I'll be back on work on Monday, Tuesday maybe, and then 3 days go by, then a week goes by, then 2 weeks, and then you start to think in months, and then you go crazy. You say, I'm not going to stay here till Christmas. So yeah, I wanted to show that, not just to explain like, 2 weeks later, and then you see Christophe, his beard's a bit longer, he's a bit more dirty. No, I wanted that the reader has the physical impression of the time going by. So I needed a lot of page, yeah. And I didn't want the reader to escape quickly, If he
That's
turns
an
the
interesting
page,
point.
that's going to take time, yeah. He's going to feel trapped. Yeah, that's what I wanted, that the reader is going to feel trapped, just like him.
Well, I think the book really succeeds at being immersive in that way. And I think one way that it does that is through how you present time, which is so brilliant in this book, and sort of small increments of time and sort of the weight of time and the stillness of the room. And another way is through color. Could you talk a little bit about the color in this book?
Yeah, it goes with the drawing. I wanted to keep a drawing very simple because the story is simple. There's not much to draw. It's just one room empty. So I have that sketchy drawing. It's a bit more realistic than the stuff I do before because there's no humor. So usually it's more cartoony. Now this
There are
is
a
more
few
sketchy.
moments of humor.
I think there's a part of me that comes
I
in
found
the
a few moments
character
funny.
of Christophe. Yeah, but so the drawing is more serious, and I have simple drawings. So I wanted to keep it very simple for the color. I thought to do it in black and white, but for the shadow, it was nice to have just one color, and I didn't want to go that far. I wanted to have something like very, very simple. Yeah, no effects on the drawing, on the color, on nothing.
It's often really dark color too, and so it can be hard to sometimes even make out what's going on in a panel, and to me that seemed evocative of his experience.
Yeah, I thought of doing silhouettes, and then I tried. He was saying that he was in the shadow all the time because the window was blocked with wood, so he was in a gray, pale gray and darker gray for the evening. So that's what I've used for the background. It's always a tone of gray all the time.
I was also really interested in the Chechen language that shows up in this book that isn't translated.
No.
To me, that was a really powerful choice to not translate it, because it kind of puts us in the same position as he's in, where he doesn't understand what his captors are even saying to him.
Yeah, at first I did a lot of Gribble, then I tried to just put Cyrillic letters, and it looked nice. It looked better actually than just Gribbles. So I've put just letters randomly. Someone said, you need a translation for that, you want to have a Chechen. I said, well, no, because if a Chechen guy reads it, he's going to be in the same situation. I've done the same with Shenzhen. Some Chinese friend said, maybe we can translate. And I said, no, because then if it's translated in Chinese, they're going to feel exactly how I felt while I was there, which is you don't understand what's going on. And same thing for that one.
That's so interesting. So you want all readers, regardless of their nationality and native language, to feel that same sense of isolation.
If there's ever one Chechen who's going to read that, he's going to...
Well, so I wanted to also ask you a little bit about Christophe André, not about how he escaped, because you'll have to read the book to figure that out. But something that I found really moving in this book is his sympathy for Doctors Without Borders. So there's an amazing thread in this book where he finds out at some point in the book that the ransom is $1 million. And instead of thinking, gosh, I hope they pay that quickly so I can get out of here, he thinks, that's too much money. I hope they don't pay that for me.
Yeah,
And,
he's an
and maybe this just
administrator.
shows what kind of person I am, but I was so struck by that incredible organic selflessness that this person in captivity feels.
Yeah, for me, that's a real moment of heroism because he's been attached there for 2 months. He finally gets a contact with the people from Doctors Without Border. At night, they drove on the car, they go somewhere in the field, and then he's on the phone, and then he has Gégé, someone that he knows. So they talk, and he says, yeah, don't pay the ransom. I can hold on longer.
It's an amazing moment.
Which I've been telling that story to a lot of administrators, and they all say, no, just pay whatever you have to pay, get me out of here as fast as you can. But like he says, it's really hard to imagine what because me doing that book, I'm always thinking, what would I do at that moment?
Yes.
But I don't have that answer, and I'm never going to have it, because like Christophe told me, he said, you're a different person in a situation like that. He said, I'm not a heroic guy, it's just that I thought that I wanted to say that, so it's on the record, and I'm against paying $1 million, which is very brave to say. But then he says, I don't know if I would do it again, and you don't know if you would do it, so it's very hard to know, because you're in a situation of highly stress all the time, and you just try to escape every moment. You try to see maybe here, maybe that, so you kind of go crazy.
There's another moment that I thought was really remarkable about his character as a person. So you mentioned he went back to work. So he only took 6 months off after he escaped and made it back to France before he went on a new Doctors Without Borders mission, and he remained working for Doctors Without Borders for 18 years. So
yeah, they were very surprised to see him 6 months after.
I bet.
They said, "Oh, I don't know. Are you sure?" Yeah, and what happened is, like, he saw. I didn't talk about that in the book because I stay with him because I want to have an immersive story. But they did a lot of things around. They were in Ingushetia. They were even in the Grozny to try to get him out of there. And he saw all the work that they have done, and he says, well, I was with the right NGO because they've done everything. And if I ever go work with an NGO, I'm going to stick with these guys because they have all my trust now.
Right.
So after 6 months, he gained weight a little bit, and he was okay physically, and he just knocked at the door, and and they said, well, okay, well, we're going to give you a mission. So they gave him a Buddhist village in Laos, where the only security problem is to wear your helmet when you drive your motorcycle. He stayed there for a year and a half, I think, and he still works at Doctors Without Border. Now he's in the Paris office, but he's been in most of the countries in Africa to be there on the field.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and he says about that experience that now sometimes he has not like a fifth sense, but sometimes he can feel, well, this is maybe dangerous, and he can cope a little bit with that. But there's a situation where we say, well, no, that's we should withdraw and just wait a little bit. And so yeah, he's been in a situation where it's been not as dangerous as Ingushi where he was, but so he kind of feel a bit more the reality of the danger, what can happen. So
Right. So one of my favorite parts of the book is when you illustrate his reveries, sort of how he's making the time go by more quickly. And so he's a military buff, and I love the scenes in which you draw him imagining in great detail the Battle of Gettysburg or Napoleonic marches. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of the book where you're illustrating his imaginings?
yeah, that was perfect for me because the guy, he's there and he illustrates all these battles. So for me, I thought, well, this is going to be fantastic in comics. And that's his, I think he would be an historian if he wouldn't have worked in NGOs, because I've been touring with him a little bit, and whenever he goes in a town, like we were in Germany, in Leipzig, he goes on the field because there's a famous Battle of Napoleon there. He knows all these battles by heart, and that's what happened in a situation where you have nothing to do. you have either your thoughts or your imagination, and the thoughts is what I'd like to eat, what I'd like to see as a movie. Then you start to think about your family, and then the marriage of your sister who's coming in 2 weeks, and then you're probably gonna miss that. Is she gonna cancel? Then you get depressed, and depressed is dangerous because you can just collapse, and then you don't pay any attention of the details that surround you, and and if you have a chance to escape, you might miss it. So it was always aware of the danger of collapsing. So then you have the imagination, and on the imagination, well, he was there thinking. He was doing the whole alphabet with general from Napoleon, like from A, B, C. He could do all that.
Like his own game about military history
and he
linked
would
up to the alphabet.
He would spend 2 hours, 3 hours, and then he would escape. That's a way to escape. And for me, someone who works with drawings and do story, see that someone can almost survive with imagination. It's very interesting.
So I'm wondering, what did you learn about comics from doing this book over 15 years?
The challenge on this one was the balance, like I was saying. I learned too that 400 pages is a long process, and it was a different way of working because I had to put words in the mouth of someone else. That was the first time I was doing that, and the only way I finally accept to do that is because I knew that I would send the page to Christophe, and he would read them and give me feedback. Otherwise, I don't know. I would be ashamed to write on someone, and then he received the book, and then he got lots of surprise, like, oh, it was not exactly like that. It was not like that. So that was a big for me. That was just impossible to work like that. So right from the beginning, I said, well, I've done 15 pages. Tell me what you think about that. And we were working all the time.
That's so interesting that the process was collaborative in a sense, in that way.
That's probably why the book took 15 years, but I was able to do it because Christophe became a friend. We have kids of the same age. My wife works for Doctors Without Borders, so she was seeing him many times. So every year I was saying, well, I think, next year I'm going to work on the book. He was not waiting for it. He just thought, well, if, just whenever you feel like it. And I guess at one point he was thinking that's probably never going to happen. But he was not, he never dreamed of having a book. It's just, for him, it's something it's 30 years ago.
Right. So I'll ask one more question that's related, and then we'll open it out to questions from the audience. So I guess my last question is, now that the book is done, what does Christophe think about it?
Well, he's seen the whole process, so there's no bad surprise. And that was important for me. He's really happy about the book. And the people that are even more happy is the family, because he has told that story to his family many times, and they've been through that very high stress time. Well, is he going to come alive? Is he going to come back? So for them to see again that story and see images and really feel what he has felt is very good. So it's kind for them to really turn the page on that story, and now it's kind of finished and over. So they told me that, well, we did something all together with the family, and well, I felt really good about that.
Yeah, that must have been really gratifying.
Yeah.
So we have time for questions from the audience.
Oh, and when you receive the book, while you think about a question, there's one part where he does think about his family, like the news is going to go to his parents and then to his sister, and everybody's going to worry, and this is going to be over in 1 week, so that's such a waste. And then he reads and he says, well, I have 2 sisters. So I correct the text, and then so he's going to see, and then my 2 sisters. So the book is printed. He gets to read the whole thing, the PDF. The book is printed. He receives the book, and then he writes it, and he says, well, I have a brother too. It was all print. And I told him, how many do you have like that? You never told me. And then his brother was mad.
Oh.
But yeah, I said,
he can't be mad at you.
well, I kind of take it on
know.
me. I take it on me. I said, yeah, Christophe told me, but I'm not so sure about that. And but it's on the process. But yeah, and then we're reprint, so we changed that. So now I send him personally a book to the brother.
Yes.
Hi, I'm a 5th grade teacher in Cambridge, and I love reading comics, and my students are working on nonfiction comics, and so often they want to go right from their research right into panels, and without thinking about kind of their planning or where it's going. So what is your planning? I know it took 15 years, but what is your planning process like?
Well, that's a bit what I do, because I have my notes. Like from Jerusalem. I came back from Jerusalem. I had a year of notes, and I just take a few months to let it like calm down, settle, and then I go back to the first page of my notes and think, yeah, this is interesting, and I put everything that I'm gonna find funny, weird, interesting, and strange, and put all that in the order that it happened. And since they're chronicles, it's working. Well, somehow I always think about the rhythm. I'm always afraid to bore people as well, so I tend to concentrate stuff. And then there's a balance on the whole book where if there's a big explanation after that, it's nice if we just go for a walk or have a little something more light, and just a balance. So it's really a matter of rhythm. I think you can talk about anything, but if you have a good rhythm, then you're okay. But yeah, I don't do a whole plan. I wouldn't be able to write all that because it really depends on, I come on the Monday and I read, yeah, oh, this is interesting, and then I do it, and that's how it goes for me.
Yes.
So thank you for speaking. I love Jerusalem. I've been to Jerusalem, and I always find it very difficult to explain what it's like to be in the city. And I think that you did a really good job of showing just how strange it is. And I was wondering if you've ever thought of going back to some of these cities or some of these places, because they're all pretty controversial and things have changed or have not changed. And I thought do you ever have the desire to go back and explore it for yourself or for a new book?
Yes and no. So in China, I've been invited in Beijing, and I love to go back in China. It changes all the time. It's like a new country every time you go back. So this was fun. I was not back in Shenzhen, Joe. I was just in Hong Kong, and I didn't have time to go in Shenzhen, but it would have been very interesting, because now I think it's just like New York. For Burma, I've been invited this year to go to Burma, and the books have been translated in Burmese, and I was #1 bestseller at one time with Jerusalem book, so it would be nice to go there. It's just photocopy stuff. They don't. They sell a lot of book, but just with photocopy. So I'd like to go back to Burma, especially now that it's more open, and I might go this year. I was invited for the first comic book festival in Palestine, so I went there. It was very nice. Actually, I've seen it a different way, more relaxed, and it was very nice. I've been invited in Tel Aviv as well with friends that do comic books there, but I didn't get the chance to go. But if they invite me again, I'd like to go. See, Tel Aviv is a lot of fun, and I would have time to go to Jerusalem, but that's something else. And Pyongyang, I think it's better if I don't go back, because people have been in jail in there for less than that, and I don't give a good image of the book, so I don't think they're very happy. And once I've met someone, she's Italian, and she does puppet shows, and she was invited there. They really like to invite people, and puppet shows is perfect. It's not political at all. So, and they can say we have international show and artist that comes in the place. And she mentioned at the talk like that after the show, the book Pyongyang, and she said to me, they almost hang me. So I don't think I'm gonna go there.
Can I follow up really quickly about something you said? So they're photocopied versions of the Burma Chronicles.
Yeah.
Are they on the black market, or?
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
Okay.
but the funny
That's so
thing is,
interesting.
I'm in contact with the guy who does that. He sends me a few copies.
So interesting.
He says I love your book, so he just and he sends me picture of the.
So you don't mind?
Well, it's Burma. I've sent the info to my publisher, but well, no, it's not a real problem. But it's Burma. There's not much you can do anyhow. There's no way you can go there, and it's very hard to control what's going on with. In Korea, in South Korea, they've translated Pyongyang a long time ago in 2004. They did 3,000 copies, and that was it. So and then. They didn't reprint it, even though it's super popular there because the PDF is going around in the computer. But they're afraid to reprint it because it's not very good with North Korea. They have to be friendly now, so they don't reprint it. So the few copies that goes around there is very expensive. it's collectors.
So interesting.
I think
to
I have a few
about,
one in my boxes.
how your work circulates. There was a
Yeah.
question back there.
Wondering, since you started with animation, if you had any interest into jumping to having a movie either from one of your chronicles or maybe some non-fiction story.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, did you have any interest or
No,
not?
not really, because I've just been doing with the National Film Board of Canada a short film in a collection of 4 comic book artists, and it's 3 minutes, and it took so long. I didn't do the animation, but the whole process is very long, and I was glad when it was over. So I was thinking, wow, if it would be like a movie, it's just a very big process, and that would mean to go back like I did for that short one. It's the story of the bad parenting stuff that I do. So it's the first story that I've done a long time ago, so I have to redraw it. I know I much prefer staying home and do 2 or 3 books than just one long movie that I've kind of already done in books. Yeah, no appeal for me in that direction. Yeah.
Fiction story.
Yeah.
Who would you team with?
I have no idea, because fiction, I don't know. I could see myself just doing drawings with some friend that do comics, and I like their scenarios. But I have projects that I want to do. It's like books that you have to read, so they're in my mind, and I just have to choose which one I'm gonna jump on afterwards. And yeah, that's a lot of freedom doing comics. Movies, you have to spend months to convince people that it's a good idea to invest in that. So you spend a lot of energy not actually on the creative process. Where comics, if I want to do a science fiction book tomorrow, I just start on my table and I show that to my publisher, and that's it. It's very efficient, and it's a lot of freedom. It's just, for me, it's the perfect situation.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the actual drawing process? Are you working in pen and ink and then scanning the drawings in order to create the shading, or are you doing that with brushwork for Hostage, for instance?
Yeah, for Hostage, like the drawing here is just a felt tip pen, and you see the frames are just colored. There's no lines around the frame, because that was done on the computer. So I would draw freely the drawing on photocopy paper. So at the end of the day, I would have like 10 or 5 or 15 pages that would scan. And then I would do the montage at the end with the text and the drawing. So that gave me a lot of freedom for the drawing, because when you do a page, if you want to have a sketchy line and then you are too concentrated. So I could redraw most of these frames. I've drawn them like 5 times, and I keep the one that is more sketchy. I wanted to have that feeling. And I do the color and the gray on the computer. And the text, I draw it myself. There's no, well, this is a translation, so that's a font. But in French, I do it by hand. Yeah. And I spend a day doing 1 page a day. That's my way of working. I prepared the text in the morning, what the page is going to look like, and I draw in the afternoon. I scan and I do the color, and yeah, 1 page a day is a good rhythm.
Yes.
Two good questions. Your books, the story for me often is, you invite us on a journey. You just go around with the baby half the times, and you look at a building. You handle time beautifully. Even in Pyongyang, not Pyongyang, Pyongyang.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, Pyongyang, like you have the hotel lobby, there's no lights or things like that. So, for me, I don't even sometimes look for a story. Even in Shenzhen, you go, you look, it's something funny, So I find that very powerful in some ways, that it is, as you said, immersive experience. So I'm not sure so do you just go with the flow of your ideas and your notes? And I know quick questions, like in the French comic tradition or any other comic tradition that you draw from, or you've taken inspiration from, or you look up to some people, certain artists?
Yes, a lot. Inspiration. Well, when I was back in Canada, I remember reading Mouse by Art Spiegelman. And that was not only for me, but for my whole generation. It was like a breakthrough, like, wow, we can do something like that. Because just before Mouse, most of the people who were very into comics, they were saying we can do more with comic books than what we have. A lot of people were feeling that. And Spiegelman came with the answer that was mouse, and we knew like, wow, if we can, you know, I cried reading Mouse, and I thought, well, if you can have that feeling in a comic book, it's opening up so many doors. So that's what happened for 20 years, actually. Comic books have been exploring different area where they were not going before, like journalism or reportage, like I do, and traveling book. And so your first part of your question, it's one of the tools you have in comics. You can just have one drawing where you describe night scene. When you're in China, you see these workers. They work 24/7, and then at nighttime they are welding, and then you see the light on this building. It's actually quite beautiful. You look at that, and it's just quite a scenery. I've seen photos of that, but I do the drawing, and that's one part of the language of the comics. But there's a lot. It's many. Whenever I do comics like that, I'm really in a situation where I feel I have all these tools that I can use, and it's very comfortable because I can switch from one to the other. And for me, that media is very, very powerful. I'm not that kind of artist that do comics that would dream of doing movies, because movies are so much better. Actually, I don't care about doing movies. My situation is the perfect for me.
Yes.
So, what I find really insane and crazy, I've read Pyongyang, and I'm looking at Hostage, and the length is astounding. And when I learned that you are not in the book, technically, I'm like, this is going to be an interesting read. Would you ever consider doing a long-form piece about yourself and your stories? I'm sure you would find yourself just as interesting as your subjects. I probably would. Because I think there's a lot to be gathered and gained from the humor you inject in your observations. So I'm just curious as to if that is something that you'd ever consider, a 462-page autobiographical graphic novel.
Well, it would be very hard to do, yeah. I like to do bits of that, but in a situation where I have a very interesting background to talk about, like a new place, because I like to work with a culture gap observation that I do, and these observations are, they're a part of me, basically, but just to talk about me on everyday life, there's not much to say, I don't think. I mean, just a drawing. And I was thinking, now I have been living in France for almost 30 years, but there's no more culture gap anymore, because I'm really part of the society now. I could have done it when I arrived 25 years ago, but not today. So when I do these parenting stuff with my children, they're just based on humor.
Would you explain what those books are for people who might not know them?
They're based on the everyday life, except in France it's called the Bad Dad Guide. So it's just the opposite way of these guides, where you have to be like a perfect parent. So I just showed the little moment where you're not at the top, and it's kind of something I've done that I wanted to show around with other fathers, where, you know, after the weekend we share a few experience. And well, they became actually quite popular.
And they have very funny titles. Isn't the first one called A User's Guide to Neglectful Parenting?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's a good translation. And so I have 3 of those, and so this is me with my children. So that's just one aspect, and I've done that after Jerusalem. There was a big book, and I wanted to do just small and funny stories. I put one on my website, and a lot of fathers wrote to me, and I thought, well, I'm not the only one after all. So I did it under story, and then we decided it would be a good book to do.
So we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I see a hand.
Can you talk a little bit about, especially earlier on, how you balanced your job as an animator versus your personal projects?
Yeah, I live in the south of France, where it's not like in Paris, where it's very expensive. You need to, so I was in a situation where I could work just almost half the year, and then I would be called to work on a project that worked 6 months, and then after that, I knew I could work on my own project. So I was taking time. Not that I chose to take it. It's just the production was working on for 6 months. I was in China for 6 months, and then I would come back home and have times to do my short stories. And I was working on a magazine that was published every 2 or 3 months. So you just had to do a little short story. So I've done that for many years, like 10 years, doing lots of different stories, different type of drawing to experiment, lots of different things. And some of them became books, and a lot of them just stayed as short stories. I like to work like that, just try one, and then, oh, I like it, and then you just continue, and it just comes bigger. It's a good way to work. Now there's the websites. A lot of people work with their websites, and that's nice too. They attract a lot of people, then the publisher comes in and says, you know, we should do a book with that. That's a good way to work too, I guess.
Okay, we have two hands, so we'll take these two questions and then wrap it up. You and then you.
At what point in the process did the publisher become involved in Hostage, and did you have a relationship with an editor? Did they have any kind of influence on how you were writing or drawing the stories?
Well, now I know this publisher quite well, so and now I'm in a situation where they, because I'm bankable now, that's the term. So before, you know, I had to insist so they would read my books, but now it's the opposite. And so what I do on this one, because I knew it would be long, I didn't show them before the 200 pages. Because when you show them, they get all very excited. And, oh, it's good if you finish for August, and then we have this and this and this. And why the rush? Because, you know, working on it sometimes. So I said, I'll see, I don't know. So I showed them really, really late. They were going crazy. But, yeah, it's better for me to work like that, yeah, these days. But, of course, when I started, I would show them. And they read, my publisher reads the book, and I know him quite well, so that I do that. After 300 pages of this book, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if the book was strong enough. So I passed it around to a few friends that I know really well, and they gave me comments, and then I just continued doing the book because they said, well, I want to read the rest, and they just liked it like that. And yeah, you need that, like a beta tester to tell you what's going on. And sometimes, when I was younger, I was not listening to them at all. Now I do.
Your friends?
Yeah, the readers. Because once they said, well, here it's kind of confusing. And if you, while you were doing it, you were not so sure, you think, maybe that's, and then you just, you know, spot it and say, this is confusing. You think, yeah, well, I have to redo that. And yeah, you need readers like that. It's much better. So after that, you know that your audience, they're not gonna, you know, they're not gonna step on that. They're gonna read flawlessly. Yeah, that's what you want.
Okay, last question in the back.
You said you have a whole stack of ideas. I'm wondering what's next or what you're working on now. That's a good end question, right?
Yeah.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah. This year has been a lot of traveling because I've been with the book in French, and then in Spain, in German, in Italian, and now in English. So I've been traveling a lot and not working so much because my mind is very busy with all the little events. I've done that animation, so there's going to be like that 3-minute film of animation. And I'm actually just working on another of these bad parenting books because I did a few stories because the kids just became, because they were very nice and easy to handle recently. But now maybe that's the teenage time that's coming in because they're 13 and 10. And they are back again an inspiration source. So, so that's good. That's good news. So I'm probably going to do a 4th album of that. Yeah.
Well, on that happy note, thank you, everybody, for coming. And Guy will be signing right here.
Yeah. Merci. Thanks a lot.